All right, everybody, welcome to today's episode of We As. Today, hosting is me. I am Gareth. Good to be back, and thank you for joining us. Excited to bring us another show in June. As you may have heard or noticed, we are doing quite a focused June releases and episodes focused around Pride, as it's Pride Month. So this is another show in that category, I guess we call it, category for the month. And I'm really excited to welcome Ted Smith to the show. Ted, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Gareth. Happy to be here.
Okay, well, thanks for being here. We've got a pretty awesome story that we're gonna dive into and dig into. But what I want to do first is just share with everyone listening just a little bit of who Ted is, and he's going to talk a bit more about it and probably do a better job than me. But Ted is a relationship and personal coach. He's dedicated to helping people develop, maintain, and enjoy happy, healthy relationships with themselves and with others. And that's really important. And we're going to hear obviously about your story today, but the relationships with ourselves is a big part of what I'm really interested in, and I'm sure everyone's going to get a lot from. And what that talks to is also your book. So Ted is also an author of Healthy Me, Happy We, which talks about transforming of relationships with ourselves and others. And I always think that that's the best order of play, because when we address those relationships with ourselves, it makes a big difference to the world. So first of all, I'd love to just go straight in and you give us a little bit of give us the back cover, or the extended version of the back cover of the book for everybody, which will be linked in the show notes, so you can find it and you can buy it, you can listen, you can do whatever once you've listened to this show today, hopefully. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ted, so you can tell us about a little bit about the book.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so it's called Healthy Me, Happy We. The title really kind of encompasses the main message of the book, which is that, like you said, a healthy relationship with ourselves is what allows healthy, happy relationships with other people. That was a concept I really didn't understand for a very long time. What prompted me writing the book was being in a 15-year abusive relationship with an alcoholic narcissist. And I didn't understand that, the abuse component of the relationship that I experienced with him was very much a reflection of the abuse that I put onto myself. So the relationships that we have with other people are a direct reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves inside. And so that's really my go-to message. That's the theme of the book, as well as my coaching services that I offer, is helping people understand the importance of having that healthy relationship with themselves.
Yeah, it's so important, and I think we all have, I guess, a journey, and everyone's going to, Leah and Scott and Carl are going to laugh at that, and the other hosts of the show when they hear that, because they say it's my favorite word. But we all go on that journey, and I think it's something that I'd love for more people to figure out earlier in life.
Mm.
However, if we don't
Yep.
go through some of that shit in our lives and go through those relationships, and it's hard to figure that out. And I'd like to think that we could figure it out from a book and from the things we're taught. However, I think when you experience it, and I guess where I'm going with that was, my question is, do you see, and we're obviously going to hear a bit more about it, and I'd love to hear a bit more about that, that relationship and what it taught you. Do you look upon that 15 years with any sense of gratitude for where you are now?
100%. Yes. When I share my story now with people, I often get a response of, "Oh, I'm so sorry you went through that." And I understand where that sentiment is coming from. We don't want our friends and family and even acquaintances to suffer. But I am so grateful for it. I don't want to repeat those 15 years by any means. Um, but, it was a long period of time, and I'm grateful for every minute of it because it got me to where I am today. It helped me find my purpose, which is to help people, and be a guide for people in their relationships with themselves and others. And I wouldn't be where I am today without having suffered through, those 15 years. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I like that stand, that kind of thought and that view on the world, because I kind of look upon my life a little bit like that too, and I'm very fortunate that I haven't been through any abusive relationships. However, I guess emotionally in some ways, but emotionally for me, kind of journey of going through being this is a very typical story, but going through a kid as kind of being overweight, going through not the best relationships through that, based on I guess what I was looking for from relationships, and then
Mm-hmm.
that path into being now working in the world of health and fitness, and self improvement, and a lot of things that I lean on within the podcast and within business. It's the same thing. I look at that with so much gratitude, because without it, I'm not sure, because I haven't experienced it, but I don't think I'd be as good a coach now
Yeah.
without having experienced that and know kind of that journey and that how we travel through that.
Right. Absolutely. I like the phrase "make your mess your message." So really, using your painful past to help other people, to help guide people going through similar struggles.
I love that. So stealing that, by the way, just so if you see me
I
posting it anywhere.
I stole it too, so feel free.
There we go. I remember doing a course some years ago, and the guy doing the course, and it was a coaching course to teach some group fitness based program, and he said to me, his big title on the board on like the first day was case coaching, and we're all like, what does that mean? Like, it's an acronym with like dots in it. And he said to us, this means copy and steal everything. That's what everyone else is doing.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's
I'm like,
great.
yep, that's exactly what I did, and that's what I've been doing for 20 plus years, and it seems to be working. So that's good. So I want to dive a little bit into, I guess, kind of your story a little bit. And obviously, I mentioned that we've been doing our shows and basing it around Pride this month, which we're so
Yeah.
honored to be supporting. And I'd love to kind of go back to young Ted
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about your journey. And I'm sure that's going to lead into a lot of the messages from the book,
Hmm.
but kind of you navigating, I guess, going through childhood, going into coming out. And, I know we touched on this a little bit when we've talked before, but I'd love just to share in a bit more detail, I guess, from, in wherever you want to start, whatever age,
Yeah.
and just kind of talk us through that start of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. I've done a lot of, in the last 2 years since leaving my ex-husband, done a lot of therapy and coaching and gone back to moments in childhood that helped me understand kind of where I am today. So I grew up in a small town in Illinois, a very loving family, but it was a time where being gay wasn't really accepted. And I was very sheltered as a kid. And actually didn't even know gayness was a thing. It wasn't until, some bullies on the school bus started teasing me for being gay that like I was like, oh, what's that? I don't even know what that is. And I started to like realize that, I was different than the other boys in my class, and thought maybe that was true. But I didn't really know there was anything wrong with it. Um, and then I actually dated a girl for 4 years in high school, and we're still really good friends today. And about a year into that relationship, when I met her, I was very confused because I was, very attracted to her, but I had these other competing feelings as well. So I wasn't sure what was going on there. And so about a year into our relationship, I shared with her that I thought I might be gay. Um, Understandably so, she did not take that well. And so, we really wanted to be together. So we kind of navigated that. And she wanted to fix me and I wanted to fix myself, so that we could be together. And we see how that turned out. Um, but that, and nothing against her, but that the reaction from her and my desire to please her and to want to be with her led to several years of like intense shame and rejection of myself, and just not at all happy about who I was as a person and my identity. And it took some time. I did come to grips with my sexuality by the time she and I broke up, which had nothing to do with my sexuality, funnily enough. We just kind of had a peaceful sunset. We're like, yeah, I think we're done. We had concluded by that time that I was bisexual. And then shortly after that, I met my ex-husband and realized, no, I'm gay. I'm not bisexual. But where I'm going with that is those several years of really rejecting myself and all that shame that I put onto myself, on top of a history of being a perfectionist from a very young age, believing that perfectionism would get me love, and kind of beating myself up when I wasn't perfect. All of these things were a form of self-abuse and not a healthy relationship with myself. And as I teach in the book, and as I said before, the relationships we have with others are a mirror of what's going on inside us. And so how I was feeling about myself is exactly what attracted my ex-husband to my life. And that was then what started the 15 years with him.
Hmm. Uh, So a couple of things. You mentioned competing feelings. It's a really interesting topic for me. And the first thing I thought was, does it take those competing feelings for people, and maybe this is to do with, like you said, a kind of sheltered upbringing, but does it take those competing feelings with someone of the opposite sex or the same sex, and then possibly finding someone like, as you did, you found your ex-husband? Did it take that for you to, I guess what I'm trying to say is, was that the the key factor in you kind of working out that, yes, I'm gay, I'm not bisexual? Did it take that relationship with someone of the opposite sex to, and do you think that's a common thing? Is it something you come up with when you coach people, or do some people just know without going through that?
Yeah, I think, for me, sexuality is on a spectrum. That's why, LGBTQ plus, like, we joke in the community that's alphabet soup, because there's so many different identities that exist, and I'm loving how we're moving toward a more fluid and like not labeling things. Um, for me, I identify as gay. I think there might be a little sprinkle of bisexuality in there, but I don't see myself ever being with a woman, but there is some small level of physical attraction there. So for me, I felt physically attracted to her, and we enjoyed physical connection. But when I experienced, physical connection with a man, that to me confirmed that, yeah, I'm gay, just because the preference is so much stronger.
Yeah, for sure. Now, how would you classify, whatever it is, define the difference between having, so I can look at, I consider myself to be, I'm straight, but I consider myself to be open to looking at the world as, people. And like you said, I don't need to necessarily label, yes, I initially able male, female. However, I
Hmm.
can look at I guess I can look at a female, and this is totally a selfish question, I'm trying to get you to answer for me. I can look at a female and think you're attractive. I can look at a man and think that person's attractive. However, I know that there's nothing that, no urge for me to have anything physical with a man as there is with a woman. How do we define that? That's a
Yeah.
big question, but I'm putting it on you anyway.
Yeah. To me, it all comes down to desire. Like, I very much, I am, I feel enthralled by many women's beauty. I mean, it's something that I really admire and I'm drawn to. Um, but that's not something I want to be with.
Yeah.
So in a romantic sense, I should say. So I think it just comes down to desire, like where that physical attraction lies.
Yeah, and maybe it's even not so much about the physical. Maybe that's some of the problem that we lean
Mm,
towards. Like you said, it's not
hmm.
something, a woman is not someone you want to be with. Maybe that's where a man is not what I want to be with. So maybe it's because we, or I just did, I'm going to say we because I'm just passing the buck, but I associated with the physical. Physically, what's
Yeah.
the differentiating factor? Whereas maybe it's a lot more than that. And maybe we just look at the world as, these are people that we think are attractive, regardless of how
Hmm.
they identify. However, what we're drawn to, maybe, and maybe that's a good lesson, that, in life we get drawn more to people for that, for the emotional support and the way that emotional support comes through. And women and men do that very differently. So maybe that's the message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually thinking of an example of a good friend of mine, who he and his current wife, they joke that they are Will and Grace with 4 kids. So they got together at a young age. They had 4 kids. He now identifies as gay. He has a boyfriend. She has a boyfriend. but they have not gotten divorced for financial reasons, and they still, while he has his own place with his boyfriend, he also spends a lot of time at the house with the kids, and it works for them. They're best friends. There's a lot of emotional support still in that relationship, and I love hearing unconventional stories like that. Like, why, there's so many things about how we think of as family as how things should be, and I love people who go against the grain. Like, that's really fun to see.
Yeah, I think that goes across life in so many different ways. And it reminds me actually that, so Scott, one of the other hosts, he had a guest on, it would have been back beginning of last year, maybe, um, Miguel Viegas. So you can go check that out, listeners, in the back catalogue and just search that in your podcast players. It was a great show, and his stories are very similar to that. High school sweetheart, had kids, bought a house, did everything he was meant to do, and now he lives in, I believe, if I remember the story correctly, it was a while ago, he lives in the basement apartment of the house where his wife lives with the kids, or his ex-wife,
Hmm.
or still wife, I can't remember. And then, yeah, his boyfriend comes over and they spend time together, and the kids spend time there, and he spends that time upstairs. And
Yeah,
same kind of thing, right? It just made me instantly think of that. And just a
love it.
nice story for so many. And whether it's, whether it's a gay relationship, a straight, whatever the relationship is, and whoever it's made up from, I think people can learn a lesson from that. Like, even in relationships where people just go their own ways, to have that ability to still connect. And I was actually always used to think it was strange that my mum and dad are divorced and remarried, and they are all close friends. And I used to think that was the weirdest thing. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's probably just my own shit. But it actually is really nice, because when you see families that can't have functions and they can't have weddings and they can't do these things
Right.
with everybody there because people are angry at each other, whereas they're just like, whatever, they're still good friends, they're still connected, 20 plus years together, so they're still friends, and everyone else has accepted it. And I actually think that's a really beautiful thing that could so many
Yeah,
people could learn from, right?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so interesting. So a couple of the things that I wrote some notes down when you were talking, and I want to go back to it because I think it's really important. It's something I suffer with. So you spoke about perfectionism and self-abuse and
Mm-hmm.
the link between those things. And I just wanted to, I guess, dig in a little bit as to what you figured out in the last few years of your journey through, coaching and, the other things you mentioned. Where did perfectionism come from for you, and how do you move past that now in your journey?
Yeah, it came from some deep desires as a kid to be loved. I found that I was lacking attention as a kid, and it was a way for me to, if I'm perfect about this, um, then I'll be loved. And it's something that I actually didn't realize for a long time, and came up in the last couple months. So, I got straight A's through high school. I got a couple B's in college. I had kind of released a little bit of perfectionism by then, so that those couple B's didn't wreck me. um, and I was always the perfect student, and perfect both in terms of grades as well as behavior. I was always like just doing what the teacher told me and all these things. And I remember in fourth grade on a midterm report card, I had an A minus on my, to bring home. And I was so nervous to share with my parents. And it wasn't because I expected ridicule or anger or anything from them. It was because I was embarrassed that that wasn't good enough. And I was 9 years old. Um, and and by the way, I went to a Catholic grade school, so like an A minus was a 95%. So, I mean, that just shows you the level of expectation that I put on myself, and that carried through to adulthood. I'm just recently starting to let go of that high expectation on myself, really embracing imperfection and knowing that there is perfection in imperfection. And there's beauty in that. There's more humanity in that. There's more relatability to that. And then I'm not wasting a lot of time and energy to try and be perfect when there's so much beauty when you don't strive for that.
Yeah, the in I guess the authenticity that comes through that letting go of perfectionism is what connects us. And when we're in we're in a similar world of coaching, we with a kind of personal coaching and development and health and fitness coaching, whatever it might be, whenever we're trying to connect with others and take them through a journey, our perfectionism, and I think for a lot of us, is what takes us on that journey. But then we only realize through it that we need
Yeah.
to drop that kind of perception of perfection with it, right? Like, I'm not the perfect model of health and fitness. So, but if I am, I'm probably less relatable and I'm less able to
Exactly.
connect with people, right?
Right.
So you got to find that, sweet spot, and especially when it comes to things like marketing and when it comes to connecting those leads in business, because at the end of the day, we're in it because we love it, but we need to pay our bills and we need to make money. So
Yeah.
we got to find that, right? And we got to be able to connect that somehow. And I spent a long time trying to figure out why I was disconnected and wasn't getting the mass success that I knew I could get, and a lot of it was to do with that. So that was it's really interesting that you mentioned that, and I think the authenticity is a key factor, and I just think it helps more people, right? And we talk about it a lot on the show, is if I'm authentic in these conversations, more people listen, more people get it from it, and and it opens up me to the guest as well.
Yeah, there's so much power in vulnerability. There's and relatability and connection. We connect more with people when they're vulnerable, when they're not perfect. So that's something that, like I said, I've been learning to embrace.
The mess, the
Yeah.
message in the mess, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, and that's something that I'm trying to work on. And actually, with new business ventures hot right now in my world, that's a big thing that I'm looking at, is how do we get that? How do we build that deeper connection and community through the struggles and the journeys
Yeah.
and those conversations, right? Just those simple connection points through vulnerability, because people, it's no surprise that people struggle through their personal development, their health and fitness journeys, and they want to know that someone else has struggled. And you don't always see that, which is why I like to share. I'd like to try and guest on podcasts and talk about my struggles as a kid, because people don't see that. People take one look at me now and say, "Oh, well, how do you know what it's like?" Right? Which
Yeah.
is also,
Hmm.
we need to drop our judgment as well as a race,
Hmm.
but it's that, right? That connection of, this is where I've struggled from, and and that people go, oh well, maybe you do have the answer that's going to help me because of your struggle, much like your story, right? Share that story in a book, and that's going to help others, but it's also going to make you more successful in business.
Yeah, absolutely. Every front door has a story. It's another phrase I love. And not knowing what other people come from and what their challenges are, and that, I mean, that relates to our day to day. Like that's how I translate to kind of stepping back from moments of possible road rage, or just like being a kind person at the grocery store or in a restaurant. We don't know what other people are going through, so just be kind, um, and remove that judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. So perfectionism, you obviously shared a little bit of that, kind of like wanting to be loved and that connection, and that's something I've been trying to figure out a lot, and I speak a lot about on the show, is where do we get that from? And I know that for me, it comes a lot from not necessarily the want to be loved, but kind of twofold. So for me, living in a house growing up where cleanliness was a really big thing, like everything always
Mm,
had to be clean and tidy, everything needed to be put away. So it wasn't perfectionism from like an educational standpoint, or like a performance at school. And I'll be quite,
mhm.
95 made me laugh when you said that, because I've literally never got that on anything. um so I was like, oh, that's not me. It's weird because I think of myself as going through that struggle with perfectionism, but however, at school I truly didn't give a shit. I did okay. I got a few good grades in a few creative things, and everything else was D's and E's. But it didn't cross over for me in that, but it crossed over in this, like, I guess, body image and a tidiness and a need to triple check everything. So mine kind of it came out, I guess, in a different way. And mine came from having a mum that was very, and still is very tidy, very clean. And
Mhm.
it was kind of like, I always remember things like, I'd make my bed because I was told to, and then she'd make it again because it wasn't good. Wasn't a good enough job, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And not through
Mhm.
anything other than just the want for it to be tidy and be nice for everybody, right? But I find myself doing that as well, even to I have a 4-year-old daughter, so the same thing, right? I have to be very careful to let it be what it is, so there isn't that.
Mhm.
But when you said about that need to be kind of loved, I guess that for me maybe was a little bit with I grew up in the 80s, and then my dad was, kind of the sole, really the sole provider in our house. So he was at work a lot, and he grew up without his dad from like the age of 8. So he wasn't emotionally, doesn't really wear it on his sleeve. There's lots of other ways he showed love to me and lots of things he taught me, but there wasn't a deep loving bond that was obvious. So maybe
Yeah.
it makes me think that maybe there was a little bit of that in my journey for perfectionism too. But it's so interesting how it comes out in us in different ways. Did you find it
Right.
also came out for you that way in the like any like the tidiness or just the little things like that I mentioned?
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, for me it was
Yeah.
the opposite. It was really academic. That's where I strove for perfection. Um, my behavior at home definitely was very good, although I also attribute that to I just had really good parents who expected, good behavior. They weren't, I wouldn't say they were strict. They just had a great way of commanding that respect. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. Like I mean, I had a relatively tidy room, but it wasn't like, perfect. So that it's interesting that we had the opposite experiences. And yeah, when you're a kid, like we form these beliefs about ourselves at a really young age that carry through to adulthood. And it's interesting how different people respond and behave in different ways because of those beliefs.
Yeah, and it's definitely you speak obviously a lot through your message and through the book about the relationship with ourselves, and that's definitely something that is still an ongoing challenge for so many people because they're not maybe they haven't figured that out yet, and I don't
Hmm.
necessarily say I figured it out, but it's still an ongoing process. But figuring that out because it builds that relationship, right? So it's every time something wasn't perfect in my life, I wasn't the best at something.
Hmm.
Then my instant reaction to that was to give up, and I've now figured out that's because there isn't a perfect of anything. So
Yeah.
when striving for that, the only other response is to give up on something,
Hmm.
and that led me down many paths of unfinished things that I quit at and then had a terribly bad attitude about because I couldn't be the best at it, and I'm still a bit like it now. But um, that's something that I see, and I see that in my daughter too. So it's very interesting. Now, how did that for you with perfectionism? How did that kind of mold your relationship and your marriage? And I say mold it loosely speaking, but how did it influence it? I guess with just day to day in your house and how that showed up, and maybe how that I guess affected the relationship as well from your point of view.
Yeah. My perfectionism has been also largely tied to my overthinking, which also began as a kid. Um, and both were closely related in that 15-year relationship. The overthinking, particularly, is what kept me safe for 15 years because every day, sometimes every hour, was different and unpredictable and would change at a moment's notice. So I was super hyper vigilant of like planning out all future possible scenarios and kind of if scenario A happens, then kind of the branching point off of that. I spent a lot of time and energy doing that as a protective measure for myself. And so it served me at the time. It no longer serves me. And so I'm working to release that and kind of choose when I tap into that thinking brain. Um, and the perfectionism, obviously I wanted our relationship to be good. And so I really tried um, to do the things that he expected of me. And he had a really, really high, impossible level of expectation of me. And it was just this constant failure of mine to meet his expectations. Because just when I thought I would like met or surpass them, it still wasn't good enough. Um, And as I say that about him, and like again, it goes back to what's going on in here. Like that's the exact same thing that is going on in my own head. Like nothing was ever good enough for myself.
Yeah, it's so interesting that the expectation and maybe the expectation of others is what we create in our head, which
Hmm.
we're often I'm very good at that. And then you
Hmm.
realize that actually there isn't that expectation on us at all, and that we kind of created that, right? Where we tell ourselves that story. So that's really interesting that it crosses over. And yes, it could possibly be to do with the other person, but it could also be a lot in the head, right? In those stories that we talk
Yeah.
through. So you obviously shared that it was 15 years, through your relationship and then your marriage. When did you when would you say you really knew that it wasn't going where it was meant to be going
Mhm.
as a marriage, as a relationship, and how long was that process from that point, if you know exactly when it was,
Yeah.
and actually ending that relationship?
I feel like there's a few different ways to answer that question because on some level, like even months in to our relationship, I had gut feelings that this wasn't right, but I ignored the gut feelings. And they would kind of pop up from time to time. There were several moments throughout the 15 years where I strongly thought about leaving, but because he was a master manipulator, I managed, or he managed to get me to stay. It finally all came to a head. The last 3 months of our relationship is when I hit rock bottom. He was also, like I said, an alcoholic, and he ended up in the ICU going through alcohol withdrawal because his body was so dependent on alcohol it couldn't go 8 hours without it without going into shock.
Jeez.
Um, he ended up in the ICU for a week, and that was the experience of that, which I would not wish on anyone. Observing that situation and seeing my husband's just body and soul just kind of deteriorate right in front of me, it made me finally realize I can't do this anymore. Like I need help. And not in the sense of leaving him. Like I still believed that we could repair our relationship and get better, but I needed help. He had had health problems for the last 10 years of our relationship, and I took on the role of his full-time caretaker. I was basically a nurse at home, and in addition to the abusive aspect of our relationship, he had so many physical ailments and symptoms that were all attributed to his alcohol use. But every day was unpredictable as well in terms of his symptoms. And it was exhausting. But I believed that it was my job. We say we take each other in sickness and in health, and I believed that it was my duty to help him, to fix him, to rescue him. Um, and so in that hospital, I finally woke up and realized I can't do this alone. Like there's no way. I have to get help. And so that's when I started to go to therapy and Al-Anon, which is the equivalent of Alcoholics Anonymous for family members and friends of alcoholics. And that's really what helped me wake up um, and get better and start really cultivating a healthy relationship with myself, which until then was pretty much non-existent.
Yeah, and I'm again never fortunate. I've never had anyone close to me go through that, but just the all the health problems that come with it. That it's an alcohol being a depressant. It
Hmm.
just it drags the person down and everyone else around them down, and that's not to
Hmm.
say it can't be used sensibly, because it obviously can for a lot of people, but obviously there's a lot of people where that doesn't happen.
Yep.
And so good that you kind of open your eyes to that. And it's interesting, like you said, there's a couple of different ways to kind of look at it from the first, even you said like the first few months, and I'm sure a lot of people go through that journey. And I think you either find something that supports you to build a better relationship with yourself. I think many people find someone else, and
Yeah.
that is what stimulates that awakening. I guess that's very much my journey. I met my now wife while actually engaged to somebody else, but
Mm.
it was 2 years of and I was very fortunate. There was no mental or physical abuse. There was no,
Hmm.
it was just not the right relationship. But knowing that and then just drifting through it anyway,
Hmm.
I guess in search probably of subconsciously in search of something else, which I think a lot of
Yeah.
people do. I was very fortunate that worked out for me. However, I think a lot of people will go from one to the next, right, without going on that own personal journey, which you spoke of. So
Yeah.
in some ways, you kind of went about it in the right way. You built that relationship with yourself, which was so much more important.
Right.
Um, Now, and if you're okay to dig a bit more into this, I'd
Sure.
love to talk a bit more about the abuse. So you mentioned
Okay.
that you went through that abusive relationship, and obviously the struggles that your ex husband went through. Now, was it emotional abuse, physical abuse, or both?
Primarily emotional. The physical abuse, he only hit me really once. But I learned later that physical abuse takes different forms. It doesn't just have to include hitting. So there would be moments where he would like pin me down and tickle me as a playful thing, but I could sense the energy behind it was like, I can overpower you, just so you know. Like, don't mess with me. So I never really thought of that. And of course, when I would tell him to stop, the response was like, "Oh, I'm just joking around. Like, you're no fun," that sort of stuff. So that was manipulative as well. So it was primarily emotional, sexual, and financial abuse as well, which I didn't even know was a thing until leaving him. But finances are another way that abusers keep control over their targets, but primarily emotional. Um, and there was a lot of things about emotional abuse that I didn't understand. I didn't recognize it as emotional abuse for the longest time because there's a cycle to it, and part of that cycle includes a period of calm, a period of love bombing where things are good. The things that, like, oh, this is what a relationship is supposed to look like. And I never put two and two together until I started doing, research and understanding what emotional abuse looked like. But those good times are intentional from the abuser to keep the target around. Because otherwise, if things are always bad, I think most or all of us would know to get out of the relationship. But those good times are what kept me around, um, made me believe that there really was love there and that there is promise for things to get better. Um, but it's just part of the manipulation.
Yeah, that really interesting on the physical abuse side of things, and I think we so obviously that directly is, I think, a great learning opportunity. How I also think of that is what we teach as partners, as parents, as
Hmm.
just humans in the world. We have to be so aware of things like when people ask us, and I think about kids particularly, and me being so I'm the dad of a 4-year-old girl. So when you're, like you said, right, like pinning someone down and tickling them is
Hmm.
could be perceived as a fun game, and quite honestly, for most parents, having being a parent, it's just something that we do. It's fun. It's
Yeah, of
it's a way to
course.
engage and connect. But
Hmm.
we teach many lessons in the way we raise our kids, or
Yeah.
the kids we're around, and this sometimes when it's not your kids or you're not a parent, I think some people struggle to see that, right? And you see that from like grandparents and other things, other people that are in their lives, and you have to be so aware of it because it teaches those lessons, right? Is that that's okay to invade someone's personal space, and it's
Hmm.
okay if it's mutual and you're having fun and it's
Right.
right. But when somebody says to stop doing it and you don't, that's and there might not be anything sinister in it, but we have to think, what's that look like 20 years from now when
Yeah.
that person's in a relationship, right? And if that had happened, to you as a kid, for example, that in a relationship might seem like a normal thing to somebody to use their, superior physical strength or size to overpower you.
Hmm.
That leads into, as everyone can imagine, a lot of issues later in life. And I always think of that as a parent, as I want to be, what what lessons am I teaching now that are going to be useful lessons and create the accept of what somebody accepts in their life. So important that we understand that in a
Yeah.
relationship personally, but how we can influence others around that too.
Yeah. I think a really important part of what you just said is the importance of how we react when someone says no, and vice versa, how other people react to when we say no. Boundaries were something that I had no concept of either during those 15 years. And, after the ICU stay, I finally started to learn about them and start to set boundaries. And when I saw that they very clearly and blatantly were ignored, similar to what they were before, when I would say no to tickling or whatever, it was very obvious to me that there was just no respect there for my feelings. So yeah, that is an important lesson. And it's other thing I want to say is like, it's about the energy behind it too. Like, and I could sense in those moments that he wasn't tickling me out of fun. I could tell that the energy behind it was intimidation and control. Even if there was a smile on his face, I knew intuitively that it was something different. Yet I ignored it. I mean, there were so many inner knowing feelings that I ignored during those 15 years.
Do you think there's lack of acknowledgement when, so first, first part of the question, is there a lack of acknowledgement of that when it is a same-sex relationship? Because it's two men or two women, and I think maybe if there was something being done out of force from a male to a female, people might pay more attention to it. Do you feel that it maybe is not taken as seriously or not acknowledged in same-sex relationships?
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that first thing I thought when you said that is, would people take that kind of seriously? And then you think the other part of that is when you look at that, the male to male to female relationship, but then you also think adult to child, right? And that's another issue that's out there in the world, is that it's so easy to do that if you're trying to overpower a child in any way, shape, or form, and that can be anything, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily sexual abuse; it could be any form,
Right.
And I think it's acknowledged differently, right? It's kind of almost, again, kind of accepted, not the sexual abuse, but it's kind of accepted that a parent can overpower a child, and that's okay. And maybe a man can overpower another man as soon as but it should be acknowledged in the same way, because it's the same thing, regardless of who's on the receiving end or who is, the person that's doing it. And that's important, because I imagine that there's a lot of that. It's almost like you should be able to stick up for yourself because you're a man and it's another man, but when it's a woman and a woman, which is completely wrong, but I feel like maybe people's perception is that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. Now, with the, I like what you were saying about, you opened up a little bit about the financial abuse. I'd love to hear, that's something, a new kind of concept to me, something new I haven't heard. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. My situation was a little different from the typical financial abusive situation. The typical situation is where the abuser is the primary breadwinner and kind of blocks their target from resources to finances. So a typical situation is a husband and wife where the husband makes the majority of the money or possibly all the money, and provides an allowance, and but there's very strict rules about how that money is used, and just complete control of the finances without, in a joint partnership, in a relationship, there should be communication. There should be, even if one is earning more, like it's a joint venture basically, with communication and shared interest and shared values about where that money goes. My situation was different because I was the primary breadwinner, so I didn't have to worry about relying on him for us to have money. But because of the emotional abuse component and his reckless spending, I was subject to, I earned six figures and was living paycheck to paycheck and was racking up credit card debt, and my credit rating is still recovering from that time because I perceived that, kind of cowering to his demands and letting him spend money that we didn't have the money to spend was an easier way out for me than for me to stand up for myself and say, no, we can't do that, and then suffer the consequences of the emotional abuse that followed. So it's like trading one problem for another, basically.
Yeah, and I'm sure that is a massively commonplace, and people wouldn't necessarily see it or understand it as abuse because there's so many situations. I think maybe the average household, let's call it, would probably not go through that as much, because I imagine most people can't afford to be living off one person's income right this day and age. So a lot of people have got that kind of, that dual income, but it wouldn't have been, just even 10, 15 years ago, where one person was earning all the money, and then that either that control or
Hmm.
the reckless spending, and the inability to set those boundaries around it. And I think it just comes back to respect, like you used that word earlier, right? No respect for what
Hmm.
you wanted, what you expressed, and when you did, it just gets, it doesn't get acknowledged. And it's the same thing. I always think of that with money and relationships, is there has to be a respect. And there's always going to be someone who's probably a bit more financially focused and a bit more financially savvied, but it takes the other person
Yep.
to be respectful of that. And my wife always jokes that, she's not good with money, but she's fine with money, but I just pay more of an interest to it. It's more interesting for me. I
Hmm.
like budgets. I like all those things, and kind of balancing all the books and everything else. So it's kind of, I do it because I like doing it, but then it takes that healthy level of respect to say, when you say to me, that's not going to fit in the budget, that's okay, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's finding that. And I feel like many people don't have that in their
Yeah.
financial. Mm.
Yeah. And in an abusive situation, um, there are actually a lot of relationships out there where the abused partner knows that it's a situation they want and need to get out of, but finances are the sole reason that they stick around, because they don't earn enough on their own. They don't believe they can, have their own house and whatever. A lot of times there's kids involved. And, for those situations, I have so much compassion. I'm very lucky and fortunate that I was the opposite, where I was able to get out and have, easily have financial stability on my own. But that can be a situation where people can feel trapped, and it's really challenging.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that although there was financial stability for you, there is a huge amount of bravery in that. Even if, in finance, don't get me wrong, money's not everything, but it does make things easier.
Oh yeah,
Um, so
tell me about it.
that's what we were talking about this the other night on the show when we were chatting with the other hosts. So we were talking about the lottery, and it was the same thing. I was like, it's never going to make you happy, but it will make certain things in your life easier
Yeah,
for sure.
right.
It's a dual journey between getting money to be comfortable and finding fulfillment as well. So that's really, really important, and there's so many brave parts of that. Now, that being said, what would you consider to be the bravest part? I mean, obviously the decision to step away is brave, but what was the bravest part or the biggest challenge for you in stepping away? Clearly, finances, like you said, weren't a big issue. What was
Hmm.
it for you?
Standing up for myself
Yeah.
and sticking to it, because I would say for the first 5 years of our relationship, I didn't stand up for myself at all. I would just take the abuse. I would believe that, that he was always right, that I was the one who needed to apologize for the various issues that we'd have. And then the dynamic sort of shifted where I did start to stand up for myself. And that's when the really bad fights would start. And the arguments, I mean, they could be really explosive and would go on for hours sometimes. And the only way they would end is if I would concede and say, I'm sorry, and be the one to apologize, even if the reason the fight started in the first place was because of something he did. um, and so the last 3 months of our relationship, like I said, were when I finally started to love myself and care for myself, and know what was right for me, and standing up to him and not backing down and not falling subject to the manipulation that I had learned, that I finally realized was manipulation. Of course, once I communicated that I was leaving, the response back was all sorts of promises to change, but I had been through so many cycles of empty promises that never amounted to anything, that I knew that wasn't going to happen. Um, so really, that kind of self empowerment was the biggest leap.
It was almost, you had to, I guess, you had to see the manipulation for what it was.
Hmm.
And maybe we don't see that enough when we're in it, and we have to, something has to happen, right, for us to step away and kind of learn that, and also be educated on what it looks like, so you can look in through a bit more objectively on your situation and say, I can see what's happening. I need to make this decision and stick to it. And
Yeah.
I think that crosses over to so many things in life. So that's
Yeah.
huge. Now, when you said that you communicated that you were leaving and empty promises and whatever, what did it, what did it, what did that end up like? I mean, obviously there were promises. Was there arguments? Was there anger? Was there, more abuse as a result of that? Or was it just as simple as you stuck to your boundary and you stepped away?
I left him and cut off all contact from him and have not communicated with him directly since that day. And the reason for that is because if I didn't do it that way, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the empty promises all would have continued. And I knew that the safest and most loving thing to do for myself would be to cut off all contact, because that was the only way to separate myself from the possibility of ever going back to him, or even giving him the time of day to listen to those possibilities that I knew were lies.
Yeah, and that's so important, I think, because it's so easy to get drawn into the good times,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we remember that
Yep.
stuff and we forget all the pain, and we remember the pleasure in that in that relationship. We get drawn back to it so easily. But that's a really brave and honorable thing to do, is to be able to just step away from everything. And 15 years are a long time. That's a
Mm-hmm.
big chunk of anybody's life to know only that one relationship, and that that one, well, obviously you know other people, but know that one person within a relationship. So I guess from there, where did you go to? I mean, I don't mean physically. I'm sure you had somewhere to go to, but
Yeah.
where did you go? Who were you surrounded by, and who in your circle helped you make that decision and be brave enough to step away? Because we all have, those people that we're surrounded by in our lives, and I'd love to know what your kind of circle looked like at that point.
Yeah. It was interesting because leading up to my decision, he and I both had a very strong mutual support system, and they all wanted the best for both of us and for each of us. And once I left him, and let me back up a little bit. So I also had a strong support system with my therapist, and then I also joined a Facebook support group for people who live with narcissist emotional abuse. My therapist and the support group are really what helped me formulate my plan to get out, because I didn't want to subject any of our mutual friends to that decision when they had a vested interest in both of us. That being said, once I left him, there were several mutual friends who almost immediately cut him out as well because of the way he had treated them. They were really just being friends with him so they could be friends with me. There were other friends that did give him a chance and did, want to try and maintain a friendship with him, but the victim energy and the manipulation and all the things that, he would normally do continued. And those friends just were like, this is not for me. Like, if you can't help yourself and take responsibility for your life, like, this is not going to work. So that was the case for most of our mutual friends. So, I am fortunate to have a really strong support system, from a friendship perspective, as well as, a great therapist and coaches. And I joined a coaching program for gay men through Gay Man Thriving shortly after I left him. And now I have gay friends across the whole country, and sometimes in a few cases outside of the US. So I'm very fortunate to have a really strong support system. And for that, I'm very grateful.
Yeah, we all need that, and it's something that we live by on the show, is surround yourself, and you have to be able to identify, right, who you can surround yourself with to their benefit and to your benefit, and know
Mm-hmm.
where we have to be okay setting that boundary and knowing where to put our energy.
Yeah.
And the lines get blurred so easily, so we have to be able to have that support and be able to step away and be okay with it, be okay as being a consequence of making a brave decision like that. I know that I kind of almost think to myself that at like 20, I don't know what I was, 26, maybe 27, stepping away from a relationship of 5 or 6 years, and even though it wasn't all directly linked to that person, I kind of started my life again, and I
Mm-hmm.
had to be okay with that because I knew it was the best way to do exactly that. I took it to the other extreme and moved to 4,500 miles away as well, which helped. But like, and we're just gonna go over here away from everybody. But
Yeah.
it wasn't a necessary thing, but I felt like it was a defining moment in that, right? Like making that choice and saying I'm going to step away, and then rather than it alienating it, like people, or like you said, trying to make people make a decision. And we had a few mutual friends, and I had friends I'd grown up and kind of known that journey. Just kind of cut it dead and leave away for it. And also as well,
Yeah.
I think there's also other parts of it too. Like I grew up in a life where I didn't feel like I belonged. Kind of a bit of I was the overweight kid that was a bit awkward and a bit out. So for me, cutting off from that was all part of that journey, and I just kind of stepped away from that. And I'm grateful for it, but I don't need it to be part of my life, or really anyone that was in it. There wasn't really a lot of positive people in that part of my life. So being away from it was the best thing I ever did. So
Yeah. I love that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So what does the last couple of years, obviously you spoke a little bit about where you're going now, but what are you up to now? What does the world of Ted Smith look like now and in the last few months and in the next few months too?
Yeah. About 5 months after I left him, I attended a live retreat with Gay Man Thriving. Had about 100 guys there, and I shared my story. And the response I got from several guys who came up to me during breaks about, just being grateful that I shared it and telling me I was an inspiration, and all these wonderful comments made me realize that, oh, there's something here. Like I can help people with this. And it wasn't just from guys who were in abusive relationships. There was one guy who came up to me and said, I can't 100% relate to your story because I was never in an abusive relationship. But the lesson I got from your story was it's never too late to take control of your life and to choose happiness for yourself. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. Like I can help people, and I want to do that. I would love to do that. And that's when the inklings of ideas of becoming a coach, and then a few months later, actually had a session with a psychic, and he was the one who actually put the idea in my head to write a book about relationships. And then a year later, it was published. So yeah, I'm in a place now where I have a corporate gig. I am in insurance, employee benefits, and there's a lot of great things I love about my job. I have a great team, and it's good money, and I have flexibility. I work from home, but pricing life insurance and negotiating disability plans is not something that lights me up, believe it or not. So I'm choosing a career that really lights me up and that I'm passionate about, which is to coach people one-on-one, as well as people in couples relationships. I might be doing group coaching at some point, I'm not sure. And then also to be a full-time author as well. I have ideas for solid ideas for a second book, and then other ideas for a whole series of books, basically, which I'm really excited about. Kind of, again, using my story to help people as much as possible.
Yeah, I I love whenever I hear someone finding something that lights them up, and I totally get that. I hear so many stories about people just doing things that don't fulfill them, and like you said, some insurance is not something that excites me, so it totally
Yeah.
resonates when you said that. It excites me to give it to someone else to deal with.
Yeah.
But it's I'm so grateful. And one of the big things, and I share this all the time in the show, and the listeners will be something they've heard a lot. But I'm so grateful that I've always had something that I'm passionate about, and I fell into it. But
Mhm.
it's given me so much stability to do other things in my life, because I've always been fulfilled and I've always wanted to get out of bed and go to work. And when I hear someone finding something that gives them that that lights me up, because I love hearing that. And sometimes I have clients that go through a health and fitness journey, and through that they figure out that there's more to life. and they go
Yeah.
out there and they do something different and they ditch, and if one little thing I say or do empower somebody to do that, that makes me happy. That makes me get to sleep at night and wake up happy. So
Yeah,
I
and it's
love
all
that.
related too, which I love. So I like how you mentioned that, people working on their physical fitness then allows them to find emotional peace and happiness. And it goes the other way too. Like what I have found is I'm in the best shape of my life. Physical fitness has never really been a focus of mine, but because I'm in a place of taking care of myself emotionally and choosing happiness for myself, I just naturally am choosing healthier foods and exercising more. Um, so yeah, if you work on one area, the other areas kind of just naturally happen too.
Yeah, we spoke a few times on the show about the kind of ecosystem of life, and a bit like an ecosystem that
Mm,
people all can probably all relate to is one part drags the other down. It's all
hmm
interconnected. So if you're not, everything else expands and improves. We do it together, and we have to be able to identify those different kind of bits of life or those different hats we wear, and be able to grow and evolve in all of those. So important.
Yep.
So absolutely love that as a really great kind of message to finish with, is that we go through our journeys and we can be grateful for everything we've been through, and it leads us into a purpose driven existence, and I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people are going through that or have been through that or hope to maybe go through that and get through any struggles they've been through. So I really love that as a kind of a last kind of point on the show. However, I do want to hand it over to you and just say, let everybody know where they can find you. Let everyone know. I'll put it in the show notes, but share with where your book is, and where we can connect with you, because I'm sure there's many people listening that have probably got a lot of questions they want to send your way.
Yeah. My website is tedsmith.life, and that has everything you need. The link to order my book on Amazon, my Instagram, my Facebook. You can connect with me there. Join my email list. Send me an email if you're interested in my coaching services. We can set up a complimentary session that way. So yeah, tedsmith.life has everything you need to connect with me.
There you go. Nice and simple. Go there
Yep.
and find it. And listen, I'm going to put it all in the show notes. So everything's in there. So you've got a simple click right in the palm of your hand. You're probably listening to this on your device right now. So yeah, head in there, have a little look, check out what Ted's up to. Get the book, go check out his Instagram, go, scroll some pictures, whatever, find out some cool information. And lastly, just thank you for being on the show. Thank you for your time, Ted. Thank you for sharing your story, being so open and vulnerable to talk about your struggles, because I am grateful for that, because quite honestly, I'm a better person for hearing everyone else's story. So I really appreciate it. I know a lot of people got a lot from the show today. So yeah, we appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. It's great being here.
Thanks so much. Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you got anything from the show today, please share it. Put a screenshot, put it on your social media, share it via your Spotify. There's a nice, easy link to do that. And just get the word out there. We rely on your support to get the word out there. You can find us as well if you want to connect. Just head over to www.weas.ca. You'll be able to find podcast players on there, information about the hosts, and more information about what we're up to. So we appreciate your support. You can also find us on Patreon and buy me a coffee if you want to support the show. And playfully, as we say, keep the microphones on, so we can get more and more great conversations out there. Remember, be the best possible version of yourself you can be. Keep making a difference in the world. We will catch you on the next episode.